The journey from an idea to a breakthrough is where science lives and breathes. Welcome to What's the Formula, our new series where leaders across science and medicine share insights about the formula for success in areas that will help us forge scientific breakthroughs. We create data with every swipe, click, like, purchase, search, and stream, every second, every minute of every day. Data has become important for virtually every business and consumer in the world. The key is knowing how to collect it, analyze it, extract it, and apply it to business solutions. To tackle this challenge, we need to change how we leverage and generate knowledge around data in order to better treat disease and ultimately manage our health. And that's what we're here to talk about on today's edition of What's the Formula. I'm Jane Wu, and we're here today at AbbVie with a few of our data convergence leaders. Joining us today in studio are three AbbVie leaders in Convergence. Howard Jacob, a genetic pioneer who brings decades of genomic knowledge from academia and the clinic into the labs here at AbbVie. He currently serves as Vice President of Genomics Research and is the head of Data Convergence at AbbVie. Jennifer Van Camp, a scientist with a doctorate in chemistry and over 2 decades of industry experience, Jennifer currently serves as Senior Director of R&D Information Research, leading a global team of data scientists. And finally, Brian Martin, an experienced IT manager with over 15 years in the financial sector. He brings a fresh perspective to biopharma industry. He currently serves as head of artificial intelligence. Together, Howard, Jennifer, and Brian are leading one of the largest data initiatives in the biopharma industry, and that's what we'll talk about today. Before today's event, we asked you on our event page, how much data does each person generate? Well, to no one's surprise, the correct answer is 1.7 megabytes of data every second. Well, that's enough data to fill your laptop hard drive every week. Now, that's a lot of data. In science and medicine, data is doubling every 18 months, but the field is limited by data storage, processing, and analysis limitations. The question that remains is, what should we do with all this data? And that's what we will talk about today. Throughout today's program, we'll feature your thoughts and questions for our panelists. So please join the conversation by posting them in the comments section. Welcome, and thank you all for being here. I'm so excited to have you join me. To kick off the discussion, Howard, I want to start with you. You joined AbbVie several years ago to lead our Genomics Research Center. Can you tell us what data convergence is and how it's related to genomic research?
Yeah, Jane, happy to do that. Convergence is in some sense exactly what it sounds like, right? You're bringing together different data, converging it together with the hope of making knowledge, right? But perhaps what we don't stop to think about is as you introduced, how much data is there? So what appealed to me to coming to AbbVie was that we were going to bring in 1 million genomes and have that data. And I thought, 1 million genomes? That's a lot of data. And I got here and I thought, wow, compared to all the other data we have here at AbbVie, whether it's our clinical trial data, whether it's our preclinical data, whether it's all the public databases we bring in, our library services that has all the publications, it's actually only a small percentage of the data. And so the question now has become is how do we take 1 million genomes, all of our clinical information, all of our preclinical information that's in different parts of our company, and put that together so that we can drive new knowledge much faster so we can get better therapeutics for our patients. And I have to tell you, it's been an amazing journey to see that it's possible now to bring those different pieces together. So 11 years ago, when we read the first genome for a sick child and ended up finding a cure, that we're now at a point where we have 1 million genomes. We have a diverse collection of people. We have a changing culture around how do we use data and bring it all forward. It's just an amazing time. So that's the convergence. It's the data, the knowledge, and the people.
That's great. That's amazing. So thanks so much. I want to go to you, Jennifer, now. You have a background in chemistry, and now you're leading a team of data scientists. Can you tell me a little bit more about how your experience as a chemist has helped you in your current role?
Sure, Jane, and I get that question a little bit here and there. So when you think of a data science team, it's important to really remember that it's a team of strengths, and those strengths are multidisciplinary. And there's a lot of disciplines that are represented in data science teams that one doesn't maybe think of typically within a pharmaceutical industry. So here at AbbVie, we do employ a number of electrical engineers, and they have diverse backgrounds with signal processing and image processing. We have biomedical engineers that are very adept at taking real-time data that comes in from wearable technologies. We have computational linguists, and an area where you might not typically think of pharmaceutics. But with the explosion of AI and natural language processing, computational linguists are certainly very key to that strategy. We also have a number of life scientists like myself. So coming in as a chemist, we have biologists and we have toxicologists, nurses, a lot of the different life sciences that are across the domains that we support, which is obviously very important. And then we really round that out with computer science, which helps with our data engineering, with the high performance compute capabilities, with custom software development. So it's really this mix of the disciplines that make that happen. So coming back to me, and kind of how did I end up here? Well, anyone who's been in the pharmaceutical industry, if you remember back 15 years or so, we were getting really good as an industry at amassing huge volumes of data. And that was because we were automating our syntheses, we were using miniaturized assays, we were generating more data than what we knew what to do with. And so I think that that's where, as an industry, we started to get very serious about, well, how do we actually make this data mean something and actually drive decisions for our scientists in the lab? So we started a group about 10 years ago to actually tackle this automation of the data wrangling, the visualization, that efficiency around the data. And we started really tackling chemistry, because that was actually the area I came from. But then we saw very quickly that that wasn't a need just for chemistry. It went to biology, to toxicology, and on and on. So now we support all of R&D. And when you take that data and you combine it now with the high performance compute capabilities, as you mentioned in your intro, and then you bring in the novel algorithms that are available, now you have a real sweet spot for data science. So that's where we've really seen the insights start to happen.
That's great. I mean, two things I heard from you is just the diversity in the background of the people who are on our teams, but in this field, but also kind of the unexpected areas that some of our experts or our team members are coming from. So that's great, and this is a great transition to turning to you, Brian. You know, you're the head of artificial intelligence at AbbVie. So the question that is probably top of mind for many tuning in is, how did you actually end up in biopharma?
Well, besides being Jen's fault, it really was the opportunity to do something different. After many years of working and as a consultant as well in the financial industry, you're driving towards profit, but that's only part of it, right? And there's not a lot left behind there for you at the end of the day. And so the opportunity to engage in a daily task, right, the work of every day, and going home knowing that your outcomes are impact on people and not just impact on pocketbooks. And that was a big sort of like, maybe this is really something to invest in. And taking that leap was one of the greatest career decisions I ever could have made. Here at AbbVie, every single scientist, every single data scientist, every single business person I talk to, that focus on the patient, it makes the data science that we do meaningful. And at the end of the day, that's what you're really looking for. Separately to that is it's not just the opportunity, it's that it's personal, right? Everybody has this, but in your own family, you have somebody who's experienced a health condition. My paternal grandmother, she had long-suffering bouts with rheumatoid arthritis. It would have been great if she had the benefit of some of the things that are available today. And so every day I get to go home knowing that somebody else might not experience the type of things that she went through because of what we're doing and because of what we're enabling. And in information research, it's about unlocking that information that makes cures possible and knowing that we have a role in that process. It just makes it so much, I mean, it makes your work enjoyable every day.
That's great. So, Brian, I recently asked you, why is pharma behind when it comes to data integration? And I wanted to hear your perspective. And you said something that I thought was really interesting, that in pharma, we are at the cutting edge of science, but not necessarily at the cutting edge of the business of science. So I want you to elaborate a little bit on this and kind of share your perspective on what you meant.
Sure. I think that the interesting thing is when you look across industries and how the different industries have been able to leverage this new explosion of technological capacity, whether it's compute, whether it's storage, whether it's new algorithms or old algorithms. A lot of the new AI stuff is old stuff that is just now possible because we have the data, we have this compute power, and we have the ability to bring it in. I think where it's interesting that pharma is a little bit behind in that sense is a consequence to a certain extent of the amazing science. We have people who are the top in their fields. They're at the pinnacle of their field because they know everything about that one thing, about that one way the body works, about that one way a compound will react or a compound is built. And we have a process around that, the process of the science, that is very linear and it hands off from one person to the next. And it reminds me of the telephone game we played as kids, right? And each one is passing it along, and you think about what's lost in that handoff. And what's lost in that handoff efficiency-wise for us as a company when we're making those handoffs. So to me, that's the interesting challenge is can we break that pipeline and fold it in on itself and build this interconnected, converged web of communication, data-driven, to drive for that impact in patients.
Yeah. So it might not necessarily be that we're behind, but perhaps more like we haven't really unlocked the real potential of what we mean by convergence and what we can gain from the converging of data and knowledge and
Absolutely.
insights. Yeah.
And it's climbing that ladder of inference, right? It's going from data to information to knowledge that eventually leads us to making the impact we want to make.
Thanks, Brian. You raised an interesting point on how data can be leveraged to improve the supply chain performance across global industries like biopharma. And so, Howard, I want to go back to you. You are bringing data and knowledge across R&D at AbbVie. How are we doing that here, and what are we doing specifically that you think is important that we share? What is some of the exciting work that we're doing at AbbVie?
Yeah, it's really an interesting time. So we started this journey about 2 years ago when we started being asked about, well, how could we generate the knowledge faster, right? As you said, the data is doubling every 18 months, but how do you turn the data to knowledge, right? I mean, that's not an insignificant hurdle to jump over. And so with all these different data sets, how do you get the data sets into one place? And actually, how do you even find all the data sets? And then you have another round of this, which is not only do you want the data, but what types of data do you want, right? And so one of the things that I think AbbVie's done really well is started thinking about our clinical data, right? I mean, the patients that are involved in our clinical trials are some of the most detailed, measured clinically people in the world. So how do we bring that data together with what exists in the real world, right? What's in the healthcare system out there? How do we connect all this, right? So what we did is we built something, and it's actually built. It's called the ARCH, which stands for the AbbVie R&D Convergence Hub. And so it took us about a little over a year to build this thing. And so we've pulled in all the data into this central knowledge platform, and then we're layering on top of this different types of information tools and so forth that Brian and Jen can talk much more about that than I can, and really now allowing us to ask questions in a way that we couldn't possibly have. So we've been democratizing the data. And what that means is now all of a sudden you have the ability to take diverse talents, people that have different knowledge sets. And instead of doing the linear like Brian was just talking about and having the specificity that Jen was talking about, we now have the opportunity to bring those things together on the same data. And it's really amazing some of the insights that we're getting around that, from looking at safety, looking at disease definition, looking at new indications, looking at understanding the molecular underpinning of disease. So it's really come a long way.
That's great. You know, Howard, what you said about the democratization of data and insights is really interesting, and it's important across many industries, especially in biopharma, as we're trying to accelerate the development of medicines for our patients. So I think that's a really important point that you made. So this leads me to my next question for both Jennifer and Brian. Can you explain how we go from data to knowledge and insights here at AbbVie? You've talked a little bit about this, Brian, but I'm going to ask Jennifer to go and then you.
All right, so I will answer that in a very non-scientific way. So just to kind of take it maybe out of the pharmaceutical realm a little bit. And if we think of purchasing a used car, for example, and you might have a piece of data, and what we would call data is you see a number and it's $18,000. Mm-hmm. There's a piece of data. Now what you can do is start to connect other pieces of data to give you some information. So maybe now I know that I have this list price of $18,000. I know the make and the model of the car. I know what year it was. I know the color. I know what condition it's in. Now I have some information about that used car price of $18,000, but I still can't tell you if that's a good price or not. I'm not an expert in buying and selling used cars. But if I was able to get subject matter experts who are known to deal in the used car area, they could easily tell me $15,000 is the right price. Now I actually have an insightful, data-driven decision that I can make because now I have knowledge. I know, because I've actually asked experts, what does this number mean with this type of information around it? So what we're trying to do is actually use our subject matter experts to get to that knowledge. So that's the true democratization, is that knowledge to drive those insights.
That's great. What about you, Brian?
Yeah, and I think it's a great example, right? It clearly lays out, like, what's the difference between data and information and knowledge? I think the powerful thing about the arch and understanding the difference as a knowledge platform versus a data platform is, what are we doing? What is it that makes it that? And it is our scientists. It is bringing our scientists in and having them explain what makes that specific piece of data in that context that has made it information meaningful or significant. So it's not just that the liver weight of an animal increased by 4 grams in this study. It's that an increase of anything over 500 milligrams is significant. So now you can create this relationship between these things. That's what becomes knowledge. And the Arch as a knowledge platform is based off of a very large knowledge graph, where we've taken all of this data, all of the information from these trials and our compound assays and everything else, gone to our scientists, made them literally part of the process of saying, what is the important knowledge here? And we're actually curating and creating that from their experience and expertise. Yeah. And then that becomes available to everybody. And so it doesn't require that I'm passing by Joe in the kitchenette and, hey, by the way, we noticed this increase, and him saying, oh yeah, you don't worry about that because that's not important. It needs to be 3 times that. Now we've got that codified. We've got that written down document, and we're doing it at scale. And so any scientist can go in and see the expertise of their colleagues, even if they've never met the person, and know how to communicate with them and open the conversation. And that's the most important thing, is how does this all drive the cultural change that's needed to data drive and work from knowledge to make the impact that we want to make.
So to that point, part of it, just knowing that we have a diverse group of people that have joined us today, How should we be thinking about that, of the comments you just said, in the context of AI and machine learning? Is that how we should be thinking about it?
Well, and that's how we're using it in the context of the Arch, is when we think about these rules that a scientist may interpret in their head, how do we actually write them in code? Sometimes it's easy. Sometimes it's very straightforward. Anything above a certain threshold is significant. Sometimes the scientists, though, can't even codify it. They know it, and they could do it if you put it in front of them. They can just tell you. But they don't necessarily understand the complexity of those rules, especially with data at scale. And that's where machine learning and these AI concepts come into play, is the ability for us to represent as algorithms that expertise of our scientists.
That's great. So, I mean, it's encouraging to hear about the promise of our approach and how we're leveraging AI and machine learning to help normalize data at scale, as you mentioned, Brian. I'm going to switch gears a little bit here, and I want to go to those who are joining us online and see what they have to say. You know, we've had a number of those in the audience share in the chat what they're finding interesting about this field, and I think it'd be great if we could share some of those comments. So let me go to the first comment here, which is from Yuki Hosokawa, and they say, "Hello, everyone. Taking notes to absorb all the panel success and osmosis, so thank you for that." There is one question, so let me go to this question, and it says, how do you sort between good data and maybe not so good data? I think that's a really important question. So I don't know, Brian, I'm going to maybe ask you to go first, and then.
So data quality, the realization is that as a data scientist, probably 80 to 90% of your work is actually as a data janitor, right? It is cleaning, it is sorting, and it is organizing the data in a way that can be used for these purposes. And we rely on our subject matter experts a lot for that as well. Because if I, with financial industry expertise, go and look at a row of gene variant identifiers, I have no clue what that is. I need an expert who understands that data and who could tell me, oh, that's just bad. Anytime we see that, we do this, right? And as we learn those rules, we learn those actions that the scientists take, we can use these tools to actually clean the data at scale. And then we can use that clean data to be leveraged in extracting the knowledge and answering the questions we're trying to answer.
Great. Jennifer, do you want to build on that? And then I'll ask Howard to build on that.
Sure, yeah. I think one other thing that we do, because we're using a knowledge graph, as Brian was mentioning, is we have the ability to actually have confidence intervals and confidence values around the data. So depending on where the data was sourced from, was it in a peer-reviewed journal? Was it something that we actually ran in-house or that we were able to reproduce in-house? So we're able to actually have this confidence level associated with the data, and I think that that's really important, and that's something that the knowledge graph lends as well. So, you know, data quality is always going to be an issue. It is, and it underlies everything that we do. So it's a great question.
Howard, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just a tidbit. I mean, I think the other part is that, you know, when we think about big data, so in, you know, years gone by, 5 years ago even, you know, we needed to go really deep on the data, right? Because we didn't have that much. So if you don't have a lot of data, you have to go really deep on the data. And one of the things that's really changed is if you have 1 million people's DNA, so you've read all the DNA, you have all their clinical information. So that means we're basically trying to build a blueprint on those 1 million people. And so we can talk about, well, how clean is that data? But now you go out into real world data where you're now bringing in claims data. So the claims data in our electronic health record data, we all know it's messier. But when you have 100 million people, and we're 99.9% identical to each other, that messy data then gets compressed into having a better resolution. So we actually are really fortunate. We've got really detailed clinical data from our clinical trials, and we've got rich, deep data, although a little bit messier, from the real world that we can glue together. And it's amazing what we can do with those combinations.
Great. So I want to go to another comment from our audience, and this one comes from Julie, who shared that she had not realized the role data convergence is playing in drug development and its importance to the future of the biopharma industry. I I think all of you have touched upon this point. Maybe Howard, any comments to this or anything you would add to Julie's comment?
Yeah, I think she's spot on. I mean, I think, this is what we're excited about, right? I would have to say that for me personally, and I don't know if Brian and Jen feel the same way, but where we started, and we're just beginning, right? We're just starting this journey of having this information, and it's pointing us in directions that we didn't know. It's not that we weren't trying, it's not that we weren't working hard, but you suddenly have bringing together the different data. It's kind of like what we've all experienced in having data around us all the time, right? We know how to find ourselves with our phones. We know how to go find information about whatever. It can all. Now imagine in the biopharmaceutical industry, it's kind of the same thing. I mean, we have a lookup system and a knowledge base that allows us to ask questions we couldn't imagine. And as we then think about it, what if we're bringing in, which we're very interested in, some really, really smart people that want to bring in their expertise and help us leverage that, right? I mean, that's what we all get up in the morning for, is how do we help the patients?
Yep.
Great. All right, so we're getting lots of questions, so I'm just going into some of these questions. So the next one comes from Ryan Bavu. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. I'm curious about how data integration leads to targeted pipelines in specific areas of need to the public. Who wants to take that one?
Will you read that one more time?
I am curious about how data integration leads to targeted pipelines in specific areas of need to the public.
I would start by saying, when Howard talks about having the hundreds of millions of patients, right, and we have that real world data set that we can access and we can extract knowledge from, that lets us actually qualify what does it look like in the real world? What does the pathway of a patient look like? What does their disease burden look like from the claims perspective, which is maybe not a holistic perspective yet, but as we get to other sources of data, as we get to data that does give us more information about the disease burden, about the quality of life for the patient, thing like that, we can extract the knowledge from that at scale. And when we connect that, and this is the key, when we integrate that with things that we see in the clinic, or even things that we see preclinically about that data, about those compounds, we can connect things as crazy as if we see things like an increase in liver weight, that might be leading ultimately to impacts in their ability or the adverse events or things they might experience downstream. And the ability to bridge that gap from the real world data all the way back to preclinical data in the lab, that's the power of that integration to affect the way we bring assets into the pipeline.
And if I can add, I mean, the other part, so I totally agree with what Brian said, but the other part that, as an industry, and including healthcare, right, we're very disease-centric, right? We focus on that specificity. That's the focus we think about. But we actually all know that we're more than just X, right? We're a complete organism with all kinds of things that happen across time. So what if we could actually take it from just being, we can still have the focus, but we can have the breadth of understanding more about us, more about what we have, more about our indications, more about our lifestyle choices, and have that information. So we can get back to the specificity. The challenge we've had is having such narrow specificity, we can't glue the rest of it back together, right? We didn't have the other pieces to the puzzle. Now we've got all the different pieces, and the question is, how do we bring that specificity to a higher resolution?
That's great. So the next question is a bit more of a practical question. It comes from Erkan Pinar. What kind of programs would you recommend to get a fast kind of deep dive training in this area?
I mean, yeah, it depends on what area. I think when I get a lot of questions of, well, how do I become a data scientist? I'm like, well, what do you know? I think that there's, of course, the areas around math and statistics. There is areas in computer science. There are areas that are simply just domain knowledge, right? And those are things that, because you have worked in a laboratory, because you have worked in a clinical trial arena, you bring something to the table of knowing what type of data am I working with, and how would somebody want to see this data? How can this be integrated? What type of ontologies need to be applied to this data? So I don't think that there is a single one-size-fits-all this is the class you should take, or this is the degree you need, or I think just being curious and learning as much as you can about the things that interest you. And if you are just naturally interested in working with data, that's usually something that's hard to teach. So, but we're always looking for those people that just like working with data, and then most times there are domains that need data science help. So
I think the one thing I tell a lot of the students that I mentor, whether they're college or even high school, is take that domain that you enjoy and that you're passionate about. What are the questions there that you wish you could answer with the data? And then figure out how to solve the question. There is enough material on the internet now to help you learn any of the tools or technologies or approaches.
Yeah.
But having a space to apply it is the key.
Great. So I have a question for all of you. I want to ask each of you, what's the formula for leveraging data convergence to help bring new medicines to patients? And Brian, let's start with you.
Oh boy, what's the formula? Do you want an actual formula?
Yeah, I want an actual formula.
Okay, I would say consistency, context, collaboration, curation, and ultimately balancing all that with wisdom to decide how you make the impact.
Plain and simple. I love it. What about you, Jennifer?
okay, well, I'll go with the C theme, and I will say curiosity and collaboration. I always believe in being relentlessly curious, and I think as an organization and as an industry, as a society, we have to remain curious. We have to keep asking those hard questions that we just can't answer. So we have to remain curious, and we have to collaborate. That's how we're going to learn. We're going to learn together because we have to have that collaborative mindset around just doing things better and finding the insights into those really hard to tackle questions. I think those would be the two that I would highlight.
All right. What about you, Howard?
You know, I agree totally. But you know, there's another part of convergence that I want to make sure that we capture. Is we've been talking about data and analytics and those other pieces and the curiosity. But that curiosity and those features comes down to people.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's the people, right? And so what I think is critical is the diversity of our people. And building a culture around the curiosity and around having the ability of having the algorithm for discovery to knowledge is really critical. And that diversity is, back to the previous question, is not just on the science side, right? I mean, we need people that understand how do you manage projects. We need people that understand, how do you transfer knowledge, right? We need people that come in and can think differently and combine all those things. But it's the people. The real power is the convergence to the people that generates the knowledge that impacts our patients.
Great.
And
Thank you
you
so
used
much.
the letter C when you used culture.
I know.
Oh, culture,
I had to figure out how to
yeah.
get that in there,
Yeah.
so
Lots
thank
of-
you for catching that.
Awesome. Well, and before we wrap up, any final thoughts or advice that you would share with those tuning in? I mean, I think Brian, maybe I can ask you. Maybe you could share another example. I mean, obviously we talked about data convergence in the context of the industry that we're in biopharma and what it means to patients and how this applies to bringing new medicines. But if you think about just the diversity of people that are tuning in today,
Sure.
perhaps there's another maybe example or way to really think about convergence, and
Sure.
if you could share that.
I think we can think even bigger than AbbVie, right? And that's the real potential, is that we can take what we're doing beyond the walls of our buildings and our labs and our offices and space. So much of the knowledge and expertise that our scientists have at AbbVie, that has the potential in other folks' hands, right? That has the potential when we put that knowledge out there for those people to bring their own bearing, leverage that, and make the new discoveries that will ultimately help patients, whether it's us helping patients or anybody helping patients. That's a positive outcome. And, we can look at other industries where they've started to do things like this. You mentioned supply chain earlier. The automotive network exchange solved the supply chain question between automotive suppliers 30 years ago. Why haven't we done any of that in our industry at this point? And especially when we think about data and information knowledge, Why haven't we as an industry built an ecosystem around that sharing of knowledge and that sharing of things? And ultimately, that's the real difference in the business, in the data science is science, science is data science type of thought process is how do we engage in that way? And it's a change in the mindset. It's a change in the culture and a change in the mindset around how we make this exportable and shareable, as well as importable and usable for our folks.
Great. Jennifer or Howard, any final thoughts?
No, I don't. I agree. I think this has the potential to be disruptive, and disruptive is good in our industry, right?
Great.
We want to keep moving stuff forward, so this is a big step.
Yeah, and I think, we're just at the beginning. I mean, I think that's the other part is, when we talk about big data, I mean, it just depends on your perspective. 30 years ago when I got into this business, what we thought as big data is totally different than what it is now, right? I mean, it's completely different.
Yeah.
And I think what we want to keep looking at is how do we benefit and create an environment where patients can be healthier. We think about all the data that are at our fingertips. What if we had the data that enables them to live a healthier life?
Yeah.
And their physicians actually had the information so that when they walked in the door, they could pull up a blueprint of Howard or Jen or Jane or Brian and say, oh, okay, we're all human, but Howard can do this, he's got this disease or whatever. Imagine what that world looks like versus what we ask our physicians to do now, where they come in and they kind of measure the same thing in all of us, and they try to make a conclusion. They do an amazing job. But what if we gave them a blueprint?
Yeah.
I just think we're at a point in time that we're going to look back and we're going to be like, wow, what a journey this has been. To me, that's the best part, is that we're just starting.
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, I think we can all agree that there's a lot of excitement for the field of data convergence. So thank you to our panelists for sharing your experiences, the lessons learned, and thoughts on the future of data convergence, and to all of you for tuning in and adding to the conversation. We look forward to staying connected. And our journey to discover the formula for success in areas that will help forge scientific breakthroughs and innovation isn't over. So stay tuned for updates and our next episode of What's the Formula, where we continue the conversation. Thank you.